Plato's student Aristotle is regarded as one of the great philosophers of the Western tradition. His corpus consists of a large number of works, many of which are foundational for individual fields. While he is usually described as a philosopher today, he was in fact a polymath whose writings were also important for the development of the natural sciences. He was born in 384 BC in the city-state Stagirrea in the northern part of Greece known as Macedon. His father was the court physician to the king of Macedon. When he was 17 years old, he was sent to Athens for his education. There he studied for 20 years at Plato's academy. When Plato died, he left Athens and settled in the town of Assos in Asia Minor, where former fellow students from the academy had established a school. Aristotle lived there for 3 years under the patronage of the ruler Hermias of Atanarius. When Hermias died, he went to the island of Lesbos. During this time, Macedon quickly grew in military and political prowess under King Philip II, who in time conquered the entire Greek world. Philip requested that Aristotle come to his court as the tutor for his son, Alexander, who at the time was 13 years old and would later become known as Alexander the Great. Aristotle remained in Macedon for some years and then returned to Athens, where he founded his own school, the Lyceum. This grew to become a major center for learning in the ancient world. Scholars at the school pursued research in all areas of knowing and accumulated a vast library of scientific works. During the reign of Alexander the Great, Athens was a subject state to the kingdom of Macedon, and this caused great resentment. When Alexander died, his empire passed into the hands of his generals, who quickly began quarreling among themselves, and in time, this resulted in the splintering of the vast empire into smaller states. This encouraged a rebellious mood in Athens. In this atmosphere, Aristotle's association with the court of Macedon was a liability, and he risked becoming a hated figure. He was a close associate of Antipater, the Macedonian regent in Athens. Aristotle thus left the city in 323 BC and died a year later in the town of Chalcis on the island of Euboea. The reception of Aristotle's philosophy took a quite different course from that of Plato. While there were many schools of Platonism in the ancient world, Aristotle's reception was slower in coming. His works were largely lost to the Western world until they were rediscovered in the Middle Ages by means of European contact with the Muslim world, which had preserved the manuscripts. Aristotle had enjoyed a long reception in the Arab world, which became the leader in a number of the sciences in the 11th and 12th centuries due to his influence. When Europe was finally exposed to his works, they caused a great stir and capitulated Aristotle to the status of a singular thinker of the highest status. He came to represent not just a single philosophical viewpoint, but rather all of science in general. This can be seen from the fact that during the Middle Ages, he was referred to simply as the philosopher by both Arabic and European scholars. This is also in evidence in the great scholarly enterprise of the medieval philosopher and theologian Thomas Aquinas to unify the two great worldviews of the age, Christianity, which represented religion, and Aristotelianism, which represented science. Aristotle's extant corpus consists of some 31 works, although he is said to have written many more that have been lost. His writings constitute a complex and at times difficult body of material. Some of it appears to be lecture notes from students, preliminary drafts, or somewhat disorganized ideas put together by later editors. Only a part of his corpus appears to have the polish and finish of completed works. While Plato's writings contain material relevant for a large number of academic fields, Aristotle's work represents the first attempt to organize all human knowledge in a systematic fashion. This can be seen in the organization of his writings into the threefold division of the theoretical sciences, practical sciences, and productive sciences. While Plato's philosophy is known for its idealism, that is, the belief that ideas such as truth and beauty are what is most real, Aristotle's thought focuses on the empirical sphere, that is, the world that we perceive around us. For this reason, Aristotle is known as an empiricist. Realism is a school of thought that believes that what is truly real are the metaphysical objects that we see in the world, and empiricism says that we know these by means of our senses. This fits well with Aristotle's background in the sciences, and much of his work is based on the observation of nature. The empiricist approach is usually thought to be opposed to rationalism, that is, the view that we have access to the truth not primarily by means of the senses, but by means of the faculty of reason. The rationalist approach can explain, for example, mathematics, where we are concerned not with objects in the world, but with numbers or relations in the abstract. The split between rationalism and empiricism can be seen as a recurring theme that appears in slightly different forms in every period in the history of philosophy. These represent two fundamentally different dispositions, worldviews, and even character types. The empiricist view is that of common sense. It claims that what's most real is the physical objects that we see around us. We know that things truly exist since we can see them, touch them, and bump into them. This seems completely obvious and irrefutable, but the rationalists argue that all the objects in the world are mutable and do not endure. When we're talking about the truth in the deep sense, we want to establish something that's true for all time and something that will not change. Thus, the rationalists tend to argue that the world that we perceive around us is merely an illusion, whereas the real world is one that we can only know with our higher faculty of reason. The truths of mathematics and geometry are not valid just for the moment, only to change later. Instead, they are absolute and valid for all time. The rationalists argue that this sphere represents truth in a higher sense than the transitory things that we perceive with our sensory organs. The dichotomy between Platonic rationalism and Aristotelian empiricism has dominated the philosophical tradition. The standard modern edition of Aristotle's writings in Greek is that of the German philologist Emanuel Becker. This work was published in Berlin for the Prussian Academy of Science in 1831. The page numbers of this edition are frequently used in modern editions and translations. Becker's work appeared in 2 volumes with continuous pagination from 1 to 1462. On each page, there were 2 columns of text, which were then referred to as A and B in later editions. It's standard practice to refer to these page numbers from Becker's edition in referencing Aristotle's work.